Good. I'm not opening song. And I'm like, 1 minute.
Two and 2, 4, down
Sure there is, but in the same breath, who's gonna fill the void? There's no, I mean, is really discouraging. You're such a doer, it's gone.
yes.
You want me to?
But one of the things I was gonna bring up was, mix. This guy didn't know that. Jesus, who's this? And it was him. Just like, I've heard that one too. There was
How you doing? Good. So good to see you.
I mean, the guy said, "That's funny."
Someone's really hard to church.
And he actually started.
Yes, I've been
Leading is, you know, kind of.
yeah. I was starting to write.
But he makes sure he tells people. He's over. March 87.
The older man has cancer. Homer Simpson's. Well, I bet somebody knows somebody.
Guess what? I check out. You're in.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Nice wife. Nice wife. Sarah. How are you?
It's just not at our house.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, he's still holding on.
I don't think so. I'm on the pod, I'm here. Even I probably like bad having for him from the same lake. Like the dogs, like wanting to well, and then like I thought it was back now, like 18, 20. But it's like when I gave my mom the story time and it was like if somebody has to go in. I've never met her.
Go back and forth.
Well,
I Oh, I see. You were trying to get me going.
How are you?
Good. I got my boat in the water last night, right across the bay. Went over there, did some bear hunting, found some really big scat, sky. I know there's a big key. It was oh yeah. There's a particular I don't know what you guys are. Good to see you. Oh yeah.
Crossroads wise.
Remodeling my kitchen, so it's gonna be.
I like rice.
Huge day was your hair for the last.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor for.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, yeah, it's on. All right. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to be in Amos chapter 5 today. But before we get there, are there any announcements or prayer requests?
I was in the gazebo yesterday and, a couple of grandparents came in looking for stuff for a new 2-month-old baby. And she was telling us that the little girl's daddy is 31, his name is Nathaniel, and they live in Homer, and he's got terminal cancer.
Oh,
And so, anyway, I don't know anything more about it than that, except, I was hoping somebody here would know about the skin.
Did she say what she needed?
What's that?
You know what she needed for like the new.
Honey, I don't know.
We just need to figure out who they are and connect with them and find their need. So,
Hmm.
if anybody hears or knows, then maybe we can pass.
knows of somebody named Nathaniel in Homer who has terminal cancer that has
Yeah,
2 little babies. So
yeah, he's got a little big girl and he's only 31. But that's all I know about it.
I would imagine through the community we could probably figure that out, but I could be wrong. So. All right.
Please keep Andrea and the boys in prayer still.
Okay. Yep. All right. Well, let's go to the Lord in prayer before we start looking at today's passage. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together here and to enjoy this time of study together. We ask that you would help us to gain a deeper understanding of your word, the history of your people, what you would intend us to know. Help the things that are said and done here to be useful for us and in accordance with your will. Be with Nathaniel and his family and whatever the circumstances are surrounding his cancer. Be with Andrea and the boys, the situation they're in. Be with our many people that are traveling. Be with everybody during this busy summer season as we try and do many things in a short period of time. Help everybody to be safe. Thank you for blessing us with all the many things you've given us. Thank you for this beautiful day we have. Thank you for sending your son, Jesus. Thank you for his death on the cross that paid for our sins and his resurrection from the dead, his victory over death, a victory that gives us hope. These prayers and thanks we give in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So like I said, we're going to be in Amos chapter 5. A little bit different because I'm working Saturdays right now. So usually I always prep just the day before, so everything's fresh in my mind. And instead, Danny told me last week that I was teaching this, so I had Monday off to prep. So all this stuff is like 6 days old. So we'll see see how well that works. So, and also, I'm not particularly good at prophecy as much as historical books. We're going to go in and kind of go through this, not necessarily verse by verse, but close to verse by verse. Some of them I've lumped together. But before we do, I want to kind of go over this and some of the historical context of what's going on here in Amos. So Amos, it says twice in the book who he is, where he's from. I think in chapter 1, it says the words of Amos, who was among the herdsmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. So that gives us a historical timeline. It also tells us a bit about Amos. And Amos mentions more about himself again, and it's in chapter 7 of Amos. In verse 14, it says, Then answered Amos and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. And the Lord took me as I followed the flock, and the Lord said unto me, Go prophesy unto my people Israel. So we know from that he was a herdsman, most likely a shepherd, and he also, additionally, we learn in chapter 7, tended sycamore fruit. And he was from Tekoa. And Tekoa is about 6 miles southeast, 5 to 6 miles southeast of Bethlehem, so about 12 miles from Jerusalem. It's mentioned in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, and we'll turn there in a moment. So what we learn from that is, Jerusalem and Bethlehem are in the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. This is in the days of the divided kingdom. And since Tekoa is actually even south of those areas, Amos was from the southern kingdom, fairly far south in that kingdom, in fact. But he's been sent by the Lord to prophesy to the northern kingdom of Israel, to the 10 tribes. In his first couple chapters, which were kind of the introduction to the book, he started out with a rebuke for various nations. And it's funny because I've always envisioned this book. He starts out just like any of us, and he's like, for 3 transgressions of Damascus and 4. And he goes on, he names these other nations. And I always picture the people there, they're kind of like, yeah, those guys, they're bad. And then he gets along and he keeps going. And Moab. And historically, we're going to see there was just a victory won over some of these nations by the nation of Israel. So they're going like, yeah, those guys, they're bad. And then it comes to Judah. And he talks about Judah. But then following, which is getting a little closer, but we also will see in that same theme that Judah and Israel had just had a battle, and Israel had beat Judah in that battle. And so I envision even at that point, the people in Israel are like, yeah, those guys. And you get to Amos chapter 2, verse 6, and it says, For thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver, and the poor for a pair of shoes. And all of a sudden, those guys turns into us. And the remainder of the book is directed at that northern kingdom. And it's actually written during a time when politically or socioeconomically, you would say that Israel's on top. They've recently re-expanded their borders and won several victories. And I don't know about how recently, the exact timeline, but in relatively recent years, they're actually kind of coming back from being repressed. They had retaken some of their borders from Damascus. They had won a victory against Judah in a battle between the 2 kingdoms. And so things are kind of looking good for them. But as we oftentimes see, it's when it's during the good times when corruption really starts to kind of take hold. And a lot of this, if you read into the fine details, and most scholars reading about this, it's like a lot of the rebukes are against just social injustice and things against the poor. And as these lands are retaken, and the kingdom is expanding, it's the corrupt leadership and the corrupt religious leaders of that area that are benefiting, and everybody else is rather suffering. And we also see that, I don't want to get too far ahead because I know we're going to be studying this. We see that in chapter 7 when they actually will tell Amos to leave and to go back to Judah and don't prophesy here anymore. We don't want you here in Israel. So they weren't very, very open to this message. Some scholars believe that's why this book was written. They feel that when they ask him to leave, it doesn't necessarily record it in this book, that then they forced him to leave. It's like, well, I ask you to leave. But, when the leaders ask you to leave, it's like, you have to leave. And so at least some scholars believe that's why Amos wrote the book. He was there. He was prophesying against them. They kicked him out of Israel. So he wrote the book of Amos. I don't know. I have no way of proving that. That's just what some scholars think the reasoning was as to why he actually wrote this, as opposed to just, prophesying it. And we do know that there were prophets recorded in the historical books that we don't have books from. A lot of prophecy was just given orally. The people come into the town, say, "Thus saith the Lord," and deliver their message and go on. Some of it got written down, and that's where we have some of these books from today. But that's at least a theory that many scholars have as to why Amos actually put his message into print. But in the beginning here, he gives who are the kings. He says Uzziah was king of Judah, and Jeroboam the son of Joash was the king of Israel. He also references the earthquake, which it is briefly mentioned in a few places in the Bible. There are some references to it, but the Bible wouldn't tell us exactly when it is, but Josephus kind of records it in his historical things, and it matches up with the kings that are named here. And so it's fairly easy to kind of tell when this was written. And obviously this was written during the reign of Uzziah and Jeroboam II. They believe it was later in the reign of Jeroboam II, after they had gained victory and gained back some of their lands. And we'll read about that in 2 Kings 14 and 25. And also, there were a couple kings of Judah during the time that Jeroboam was king of Israel. So that also helps us date it to a fairly narrow time frame. And I'm not going to go look at Chronicles, even though we've studied that more recently, because most of the information that'll be relevant to what we're looking at is in 2 Kings. But as I recall, we're getting back into that 6 days thing. I believe the name Uzziah is recorded differently in Chronicles and in Kings. But it's easy enough to tell that he just went by two different names. And here it says Uzziah, which I believe is what is used in Chronicles. But we're going to go to 2 Kings chapter 14. Actually, before we go there, I was going to go to 2 Chronicles 11 just briefly because it mentions Tekoa, the town where Amos was from. So if we go to 2 Chronicles chapter 11, it's very briefly mentioned. Starting in verse 5, it says, "And Rehoboam dwelt in Jerusalem and built cities for defense in Judah. He built even Bethlehem and Etam and Tekoa." And then it goes on to name other cities. So scholars believe this is the same Tekoa where Amos was from. It was a very sandy area. So it makes sense to him being a herdsman. Obviously, he had an area with some sycamore trees as well. So he may have had one of the more desirable lots in Tekoa, if you will. having sycamore trees, but also a lot of herdsmen, very sandy. It wasn't so much an area where you would grow crops as much as you would graze livestock. But Rehoboam had built it, and that's in Second Chronicles 11. So that was significantly before. If we were to stay in Chronicles, the kings that are reigning is in like chapter 26. So a lot of time has passed since that city was established as a defense city for Jerusalem. But going to 2 Kings chapter 14, we can read about the events that were the kings and the politics that were going on at the time. First Kings won't work. You got to find 2 Kings. So 2 Kings chapter 14, in verse 23, we'll read about Jeroboam being placed on the throne. But I'd like to back up so we kind of have the historical context of what's going on between these two kingdoms. And so I'll start in verse 8 of 2 Kings chapter 14. It says, Then Amaziah sent messengers to Jehoash, son of Jehoaz, son of Jehu, king of Israel, saying, Come, let us look one another in the face. And Jehoash, the king of Israel, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, The thistle that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, Give thy daughter to my son to wife. And there passed by a wild beast that was in Lebanon, and trod down the thistle. Thou hast indeed smitten Edom, and thine heart has lifted thee up. Glory of this, and tarry at home. For why shouldest thou meddle to thy hurt, that thou shouldest fall, even thou and Judah with thee? But Amaziah would not hear. Therefore Jehoash, king of Israel, went up, and he and Amaziah, king of Judah, looked one another in the face at Bethshemesh, which belongeth to Judah. And Judah was put to the worse before Israel, and they fled every man to their tents. And Jehoash, king of Israel, took Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Jehoash, the son of Azahiah, at Bethshemesh, and came to Jerusalem, and broke down the walls of Jerusalem, from the gate of Ephraim unto the corner gate, 400 cubits. And he took all the gold and silver, and all the vessels that were found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasures of the king's house, and hostages, and returned to Samaria. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoash, which he did, and his might, and how he fought with Amaziah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jehoash slept with his fathers, and was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. And Jeroboam his son reigned in his stead. And Amaziah the son of Joash, king of Judah, lived after the death of Jehoash the son of Jehoaz, king of Israel, 15 years. And the rest of the acts of Amaziah, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Now they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But they sent after him to Lachish and slew him there. And they brought him on horses, and he was buried at Jerusalem with his fathers in the city of David. And all the people of Judah took Azariah, which was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. And he built Elath and restored it to Judah. After that the king slept with his fathers. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. This is the time frame when Amos is prophesying. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He restored the coast of Israel from the entering of Hamath unto the sea of the plain, according to the word of the Lord God of Israel, which he spoke by the hand of his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, which was of Gath-hepher. For the Lord saw the affliction of Israel, that it was very bitter, and there was not any shut up, or any left, nor any helper for Israel. And the Lord said not that he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, but he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam, the son of Joash. Now all the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, and all that he did, and his might, and how he warred, and how he recovered Damascus and Hamath, which belonged to Judah, for Israel. Are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jeroboam slept with his fathers, even with the kings of Israel, and Zechariah his son reigned in his stead. So we see here, and this is relevant, that Jeroboam, the king of Israel, when this book of prophecy from Amos was written, he reigned 41 years, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, because he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. And if you study that, that was after the kingdom split. Jeroboam set up those golden calves and told Israel to worship the Lord there. And it appears that they were attempting to worship Jehovah, but for political reasons, he did not want them to return to Israel, or not to Israel, to Jerusalem, to go to the temple for worship. So he just basically created his own worship system that was not authorized by God and set up these statues and all that. So that is the sin that Jeroboam is continuing in. But we also see that he restored these coasts from the entering of Hamath under the sea of the plain. So he took back territories that Israel had lost. So it's interesting because in Amos, we see God condemning Israel. And like I said, most scholars believe this was after they had gained these lands back. And we see that God had just helped them, if that is true, to regain these lands. He had not abandoned them. It isn't like God had treated them badly. Even when they had abandoned him, he is helping them to gain victory and regain their lands. But even after he does that, they're still becoming more corrupt. And as if we would continue through the history, we see that leading to their eventual downfall. And so those are the circumstances that Amos comes to speak to them in. Also of note, putting it in the timeline, it's very close to the other prophecies. We just finished Hosea. It's very close in timeline to that as well. And also Jonah, he's mentioned here. He would have been in the same time frame. So several of the minor prophets occurred fairly close together in time. But that's kind of the historical context of what's going on. Let's just look at the passages in Amos chapter 5 and kind of go through this. Amos chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Hear ye this word, which I take up against you, even a lamentation, O house of Israel. A virgin of Israel is fallen, she shall no more rise. She is forsaken upon her land. There is none to raise her up." This is a dirge or a lament. These first two verses, it's kind of a preface to what he'll say in the rest of the chapter. He kind of starts it out with this, "Hear this word," and some people feel that this may have been written in the there's indication from Hebrew scholars that this is written in the same style as a lament, a mourning. And so he's kind of put these two verses down before he gets into his condemnations, which start out in verse 3. In verse 3, it says, "For thus saith the Lord God, the city that went out by 1,000 shall leave 100, and that which went forth by 100 shall leave 10 to the house of Israel." This term, when it says went out, that typically refers to fighting men. When there's a battle, the men went out of the city. So it appears to me what he's saying is that 10% will remain. You're going to go out in battle. You got 1,000 people, 100 will remain. You're going to go out and you had 100 that can go into battle, 10 will remain. So 90% losses of the fighting force is kind of what's predicted. And in verse 4, we see it's really uniquely how this chapter's put. He's going to put forth condemnations or put forth things that are going to happen, like in verse 3 where he says 1,000 will go out, 100 will remain. But interspersed every few verses through this chapter is this same turn, worded differently, but it's an overall theme of this book, an overall theme of God's message overall. In verse 4 it says, "For thus saith the Lord unto the house of Israel, seek me, and ye shall live." He's going to throw out a condemnation. He's going to throw out a prophecy of doom and gloom. You've done evil. These bad things are going to happen to you. And then he's going to intersperse that message with, seek me and you will live. It's repeated in here multiple times in this chapter. So to me, it's one of the biggest takeaways of this chapter is this rhythm of how it's bad things are going to happen. You've abandoned God. You've done evil. Seek me. Bad things have happened. You've done evil. Bad things are going to happen. Seek me. It's repeated over and over. So it's worth, if you haven't picked up on that, to read it again and just look for those repeated calls of the Lord to return unto him. Verse 5, it says, "But seek not Bethel, nor enter into Gilgal, and pass not to Beersheba, for Gilgal shall surely go into captivity, and Bethel shall come to naught." Bethel was one of the places where the golden calves were set up. Gilgal was mentioned numerous times as a center of idolatry where a grove was. I'm not sure about Beersheba. I found some scholars that indicated because it was a historical site and it's near the border between the two tribes, but Abraham had numerous events and Isaac there. Some historians believe that they were going there, and much like what they were doing at Bethel, they were going there because they were historical sites where God had done things for Israel. But there was some, if I understand what the historians are saying correctly, they were going there hoping to worship an angel that had delivered the message or have some spiritual revelation. So again, it seems like, I couldn't prove that. I didn't have time in my studies, but at least some historians lump that location with Bethel, where we're worshiping God or we're seeking God, but not in a way that he told us to, and kind of a false worship of God's power. But either way, all these places are places where they're worshiping either false gods or falsely worshiping God. And he's saying, don't seek Bethel, don't seek Gilgal, don't go to Beersheba. And once again, in verse 6, we have that same call again. Seek the Lord, and ye shall live, lest he break out like fire in the house of Joseph and devour it, and there be none to quench it in Bethel. So he's saying again, these statues in Bethel are not going to quench the fire of the Lord. When it breaks out, you need to seek the Lord. Verse 7, it mentions the lack of righteousness. It says, "Ye who turn judgment to wormwood and leave off righteousness in the earth." This is why many people believe this involves some of the evil and corruption that's going on, particularly as they have regained political power. And once again, in verse 8, we will see this. "Seek him that maketh the 7 stars and Orion, and turneth the shadow of death into the morning, and maketh the day dark with night, that calleth for the water of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." And I read that, and I couldn't help but think of Romans 1:20. They're saying, seek him that made the 7 stars in Orion, and the one that made the constellations, and all these things that we can go outside and look at. And of course, Romans 1:20 says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and godhood, so that they are without excuse." It's kind of interesting how parallel that same passage is. He's calling out. He's like, you can see these things. You can see the 7 stars. You can see Orion. Seek the one that made him. The Lord is his name. Verse 9, it says that strengthen the spoiled against the strong, so that the spoiled shall come against the fortress. It's continuing that thought that the Lord is strengthening the spoiled against the strong. I don't have a whole lot on that. But in verse 10, they continue, they hate him that rebuketh in the gate, and they abhor him that speaketh uprightly. So once again, we're returning to how Israel is hating justice. They don't like the people that will rebuke them in the city gates, and they avoid those that speak uprightly. Verse 11 goes on to say, for as much therefore as you're treading upon the poor, and ye take from him burdens of wheat, ye have built houses of hewn stone, but ye shall not dwell in them. Ye have planted pleasant vineyards, but ye shall not drink wine of them. For I know your manifold transgressions and your mighty sins. They afflict the just, they take a bribe, and they turn aside the poor in the gate from their rights. Therefore, the prudent shall keep silent in that time, for it is an evil time. I don't know. I thought about this. The prudent shall keep silent. It stands out to me. I know many people that when evil things are happening, there is a certain part in just the prudent keeping silent. They don't partake, and there's a place for those that just avoid these things. But as opposed to speaking out against it, the prudent are keeping silent. So I have 2 conflicting thoughts on that. One is that the prudent should keep silent, and the other one is maybe he's saying the prudent are keeping silent, and it's an evil time because they are keeping silent and they're not speaking out against these injustices. I'm not sure which is meant there in verse 13. I've thought of both as being possibilities there.
The way my version's written, it says, therefore he who is prudent will keep silent at such a time.
Okay.
It might be that it's a waste of time. I mean,
Right.
They don't understand the right direction, but they realize that the culture's moving in a direction, and the best thing to do is to let the culture reap the harvest it's planting and do what you can with what you got.
Yeah.
Which
And
is kind of where we're at.
and
as a
keep silent.
culture right now.
Exactly. And that was my first thought when I read this on what that meant. And so that makes sense in that translation. And that was my thought. It's like, yeah, there definitely comes a point when the prudent people just, I'm going to be over here minding my own business while you all do this stupid stuff. And that, I kind of think that's what it is, but I'm not 100% sure. But that is kind of my general thoughts on what it means there in verse 13. Verse 14, we get back to that ever-present call. It says, seek good and not evil, that ye may live. And so the Lord, the God of hosts, shall be with you as ye have spoken. And verse 15, hate evil and love the good and establish judgment in the gate. It may be that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be gracious unto the remnants of Joseph. So once again, that call, that kind of reminds me of Micah 6:8, where it says, love justice. Well, maybe I should look that up rather than trying to quote it. Love mercy. Yeah, that passage is kind of rather famous. It kind of reminds me of that. He's saying, hate evil and love good. Establish judgment in the gate. So once again, this repeated call to do the right thing. Verses 16 and 17, it says, Therefore the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord saith thus, Wailing shall be in all the streets, and they shall say in all the highways, Alas, alas. And they shall call the husbandmen to mourning, and such as are skillful of lament, wailing. And in all vineyards shall be wailing, for I will pass through thee, saith the Lord. Woe unto you that desire the day of the Lord. To what end is it for you? For the day of the Lord is darkness, and not light, as if a man did flee from a lion, and a bear met him, and went into the house, and leaned his hand on a wall, and a serpent bit him. Shall not the day of the Lord be darkness and not light, even very dark, and no brightness in it? And this wailing and mourning over what they've lost, it's kind of reminding me of Revelation 18, and maybe it's just that my kids read this at nap time too much. But, with the city of Babylon, Revelations 18:10 says, Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, in 1 hour thy judgment is come, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. This just kind of reminds me of that same thing. He's talking about, people are going to be weeping and mourning when this day of judgment from the Lord comes. And we see, at least if we assume that Revelation is in the future, we see that the same effect that God was calling out on Israel it's still true. I mean, the day of the Lord's going to come, and those that are practicing evil and profiting from it, they're going to be bewailing and lamenting. The final verses, well, not quite the ones. Verse 21 through 26, it says, I despise your feast days, and I will not smell in your solemn assemblies. Though ye offer me burnt offerings and your meat offerings, I will not accept them. Neither will I regard the peace offerings of your fat beast. Take you away from me the noise of thy songs, for I will not hear the melody of thy vowels. But let judgment run down as waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream. Have ye offered unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? But ye have borne the tabernacle of your Moloch and Chin, your images, the star of your God, which ye made unto yourselves. I found a couple different lines of thoughts among scholars regarding this. I hate and I despise your solemn feast days. Some people think he's referring to things in Jerusalem, which is where feast days are supposed to be held. But given the context of who he's speaking to and the worship practices they had going on, I really think he's referring to their false worship of the calves in the northern kingdom. They are having feast days. They are offering sacrifices unto God, but they're not doing them in the way that God prescribed. They've set up this false worship. I think there's very much a parallel in today's world where in today's time, where people are having religious gatherings and calling it worship, but they're not worshiping God in the way that he asked to be worshiped. They're turning it into an experience that they want to have and not what God wants. And I feel like as a culture, a lot of Christianity, I just can't help but see parallels between these people in Israel that just decided to worship God their own way and not the way God asked them, as opposed to trying to follow the Bible and trying to do things in accordance with what God outlined there. It's not exactly the same, but I certainly see a lot of parallels there in today's culture and what was going on in Israel. So, and finally, the last verse, he spells out the effects of what's going to happen because of these things. In verse 27, it says, Therefore, I will cause you to go into captivity beyond Damascus, saith the Lord, whose name is the God of hosts. So he's indicated this evil is coming because of their sins and their injustices. but he hasn't said until now what it is. And here he says, I'm going to take you into captivity beyond Damascus. So, any thoughts, any questions before we wrap up? We're pretty much used up all our time. All right. Well, let's stop and we'll prepare for worship in a few minutes. Yep.
Okay.
He would really like to see.
I'm gonna do the announcements now. Just let you know.
I like the way.
Well,